Hello, my name's Dr. Padilla. Today we're going to talk about functions in R. If you're new to programming, you might have no idea what this concept of functions are, and we're going to talk about the syntax of functions, how to use functions, and also talk about operators in R. So let's jump right in. So let's begin by talking a little bit about what these functions actually are. When you download R, you're downloading a full infrastructure of information that includes various built-in packages. And some of the built-in information includes functions. Now, functions are ultimately these self-contained code chunks that do a particular operation for you so that you don't have to write out every single operation by hand. And the real amazing part about R is that people are developing packages and functions all of the time. So if there's anything that you think that you want to do in R, I guarantee you there is a package for it, unless you're doing something very complex and abstract. So let's first talk about operators, and then we'll work our way up to functions in R. Now, what an operator is any type of algorithmic computation. So an operator could be a plus or a minus symbol. It can be a multiplication symbol, etc. In some ways, when you're first starting out in R, it can seem like a very large, complicated calculator. So we could do simple stuff like 1 plus 2 plus 3. And I can run that line of code, and it will give me the answer of 1 plus 2 plus 3 equals 6, which is excellent. You could continue on like this with thousands and thousands of numbers, adding them up, subtracting them by hand, which is fine. But ultimately what we want to do in the power of programming is we could take this set of information and save it and be able to use it later to do several computations, maybe a sequence of computations. So one way to go ahead and save or store this sequence of 1 plus 2 plus 3 is with another operator. Again, this plus symbol is an operator, or minus symbol is an operator, and one operator you'll use all of the time looks like this right here. And what this operator is saying is that we are going to assign this sequence of information to something, and we are going to name it something. So I'm going to name it operator. Now, if I run this line of code here, a cool thing happens where it stores these values, the output of this computation, over here. So we have this operator value that has been assigned to 6. And if we add some more information to it and rerun this code, it updates the operator, which is really, really cool. The name operator. So this is really the most simplistic form of operators, and you can look up several other operators that you can use in R as well, which is great. Now, how does this relate to functions? If we wanted to continue this same process, but we wanted to, in addition to adding these numbers together, we wanted to get some other summary statistics about them, like a mean, standard deviation, etc., we would have to do this again with additional operators over and over and over to find those calculations. Instead, what we can do is to save these values into a data set. And one way to do that is with a function. So let's start talking about functions. Now, what functions have going on for them is there's a syntax that's associated with a function, or all programming languages. What a syntax means are the rules or the grammar that define how the code can actually be put together. So that's really what I want to focus on today, is the syntax or the rules for a function. Now the rules go, you have a function name, you have an open parenthesis and a closed parenthesis, and everything in between those two, you can think of them as housing or grabbing information, is the input. So we have, for the syntax, it's a function name, and then in between these parentheses, we have input. So what is the function name? The function name is specified by the programmer who wrote the function. if you start writing your own functions, you can name them whatever you want. So the trick is once you think of something that you want R to do, like create a standard deviation, etc., you need to find which function would actually do that computation. And the way to call that particular function is with its name. So we need to know the name of the function. And in addition, we need to know this input information. Now, what can go in the input information, also called arguments, is either data or specifications of the operation. Essentially, what's going on here is that someone has written this function for you and has written it in such a way where you can replace information in the function with your data or your computation. But you need to know, how that information is arranged in the function to make it work. But suffice to say that those are the two major properties of a function. You have its name, and then you have an open and closed parenthesis, and that houses all of the input information that you stick into the function. So let's look at an example. Here we have a code chunk, and we're going to look at a function, and the function name, this is what is before the open and closed parenthesis, is just C. C stands for combine. And what this particular function will do is it will combine a sequence of information into a set for us. So for example, if I typed 1, 2, 3, and I ran this function, if I look below, the output will be 1, 2, 3, which is really cool. So this is actually saying that it is combining 1 and 2 and 3. And if I added more numbers, it would add those to the set. It would combine them together. So we could have a really big set of information, and if we use this C function, it will combine those for us. And it doesn't just have to be numbers that are combined. You can also combine words. Now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and hi, which is excellent. We can start to do things to this particular set of information that we created with this combine or C function. But what we'll need to do first is to save it as something. Right now, I have just been kind of running these lines of code, but they're not being stored or saved anywhere. Now you'll remember from up here, what we can do is use the assign operator to take the output of this function, which is combine, and save it as something. I'm going to call this df, and you will see many tutorials use df, which stands for data frame. So if I run this, if you notice over here, we have values of df, and this are the values that we specified. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, and hi, which is great. But we can name this anything, and it will save it over here. So this is our name that we're assigning to the output of this C function here. I'm going to change this back to 1, 2, 3. Okay. Now we have this data frame that has the value of 1, 2, and 3. And let's say we wanted to do the same thing as we've done up here. We want to add them together. Well, what we can do is we can figure out what function does that for us. So we don't have to type in this plus to get it to work. Now the function that does that is sum and open and close bracket. And what it is looking for is what we need to sum. So we want to sum our data frame that we've saved here. If we run this line of code, it will tell us the summation of these values in the exact same way that this would do. We can print the operator and it'll say 6. So we've basically replicated the hand calculation we've done up here, but we've just done it with a function. And that's ultimately what functions are. Some nice programmer has developed a function so that you don't have to do something by hand. You can just use their function and compute the values that you need. Other things that we can do that are fairly simple would be to look at the mean of this data frame. The mean is 2. We can also look at the standard deviation, SD, of this particular data frame, which is 1. So you can see we just did many different functions very, very quickly, and we didn't have to do those calculations by hand because we have it saved. We just have to know what the name of the function is, and then we have to give it the proper values or inputs that it is looking for. This seems simple because I have these memorized. They're very simplistic. But when you're looking at more complex functions, it can actually be a little tricky to know the exact input value that you need to use for that particular function. So what I do is if I think of something that I want R to do, I'll Google it, figure out which particular function does that process that I'm interested in, and I'll get a little bit of information when I Google it. But also what you can do is you can run a function called help. And this function of help, which has an open and closed bracket, this is the function name, and the input of this is actually any other function name. So if we wanted to do sum, what will happen is when we run this function named help with the input value sum, it is going to tell us a little bit about this particular function of sum over here. It gives us kind of a quick tips about that particular type of function. We could do it for mean. It's going to tell us a little bit about this mean function and so on. Now, notice that it is indicating at the top here that this is from the base R downloader package. Now that's excellent, and what that is indicating is all of the functions that I've shown you here today use the base functions that have been downloaded by default when you installed R on your machine. In order to get more advanced functions, what you'll have to do is to download packages. So watch the next tutorial about how to download packages and where to find information about packages. Today we learned about functions in R. We learned a little bit about how to use functions and how to search for information about how to implement aspects of those functions. If you want to learn more about how to make data visualizations in R, go ahead and click that subscribe button, and I will see you next time.